So we just received a major Second Amendment win. The Third Circuit En Banc panel just ruled that the federal law which prohibits nonviolent individuals and felons from possessing firearms is in fact unconstitutional and does not adhere with the Supreme Court's Bruen decision. So let's talk about this. But real quick before we jump in this video, I want to do a quick channel announcement. I am releasing new merch. This is one of the shirts that I'm going to be releasing. It is the Text, History, and Tradition shirt. And then also I have another shirt that says Armed. I'm going to put it here on the screen. And it says Built and Maintained. So new channel merch is out there. I will leave a link down below. I really enjoy these shirts. I really like them. It's very relevant for the Second Amendment. And there's a lot of like little things on here. I mean, of course, it says Armed Scholar, Built and Maintained. But then it also has not a second class right, which refers to a comment by Justice Thomas. And then you have established 1791, which is the historical precedent that governments would have to show with some sort of evidence dating back to 1791. So really cool designs. Again, I will leave a link down below if you're interested. As I mentioned in the intro, in this video, we're going to be discussing a huge win that we just received from the Third Circuit En Banc panel. The case we're going to be breaking down is called Range v. Garland, and it involves a challenge to the federal laws which prohibit someone with a nonviolent felony or a misdemeanor equivalent from being able to own, possess, or acquire firearms. We just received a decision from the Third Circuit En Banc panel where a majority of the panel, including 2 Biden-appointed judges, found that the federal law as applied to Mr. Range is unconstitutional. Now, this case found its way up before the Third Circuit En Banc panel because 26 years ago, the plaintiff here, Brian Range, was convicted of concealing some of his income so that he could obtain additional food stamps, and he essentially lied on a form. He simply made some false statements on the form about his income so that he could get those food stamps, but because of that, he was charged and convicted of a Class 1 misdemeanor in the state of Pennsylvania. Mr. Range has had no serious criminal issues before or after that incident, and really it's just that one conviction of concealing his income so that he could obtain food stamps. However, because of that one incident and that one misdemeanor conviction, the government bans Mr. Range forever, essentially, from possessing firearms. Mr. Range is barred from possessing firearms per 18 U.S.C. section 922G1 on an account of a misdemeanor offense which is claimed to be a felony equivalent. Mr. Range brought this lawsuit originally before a district court in Pennsylvania, and he sought for the federal government to no longer be able to bar him from possessing or purchasing firearms only because of that one nonviolent misdemeanor 26 years ago. However, the district court ruled in favor of the government on a motion for summary judgment. In doing so, the court used something known as the two-step approach. But as we all know, after the Supreme Court's decision in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruen, there is no longer a valid argument to use the two-step approach. Instead, you need to use text, history, and tradition. So that is kind of what led to this case then making its way back up all the way to the Third Circuit En Banc panel, because he then appealed to the Third Circuit, and a 3-judge panel on the Third Circuit reviewed the case and again sided with the government. They did look at history and tradition, but they believed that there was a history and tradition to restrict him from being able to purchase and possess firearms. So there, the Third Circuit 3-judge panel found that his misdemeanor, although nonviolent, qualified under 922G1 and therefore excluded him from the class of the people afforded the right to keep and bear arms under the text of the Second Amendment. Well, Mr. Range did not quit, and good for us and good for him, because he went before an en banc panel in the Third Circuit, and the Third Circuit En Banc panel just issued their decision. And they found that 922G1, as applied to Mr. Range, is in fact unconstitutional. The majority opinion was written by Judge Hardiman, and it was joined by a bunch of other judges. In the decision, the majority discussed how the precedent that they had used prior was incorrect, and the use of the two-step approach was expressly rejected by the Supreme Court in Bruen, and so therefore they had to go back and look at some new things using the new analysis or the renewed analysis of text, history, and tradition. They then go on to state that, but the where question decided in Bruen is not at issue here. Range's appeal instead requires us to examine who is among the people protected by the Second Amendment. Range claims he is one of the people, entitled to keep and bear arms, and that our nation has no historical tradition of disarming people like him. The government responds that Range has not been one of the people since 1995, when he pled guilty in Pennsylvania State Court to making a false statement on his food stamp application and that his disarmament is historically supported. So here the Third Circuit is nicely clarifying what this whole issue is about. The government claims that Mr. Range is not part of the people as mentioned in the text of the Second Amendment. The government claims that the nonviolent food stamp conviction makes Mr. Range fall outside of the class of the people protected by the Second Amendment. In contrast, Mr. Range argues that that's not true and that there is no historical evidence to support that type of argument. Then the court moves to the constitutional analysis as established in Bruin. Under Bruin, the court must first decide whether the text of the Second Amendment applies to a person and his proposed conduct. If it does, then the government bears the burden of proof, and it must affirmatively prove that its firearms regulation is part of the historical tradition that delimits the outer bounds of the right to keep and bear arms. And on review, the court found that Mr. Range is part of the people protected by the Second Amendment, and he desires to possess firearms for self-defense, and that is conduct protected by the text of the Second Amendment. The court stated that, in sum, we reject the government's contention that only law-abiding responsible citizens are counted among the people protected by the Second Amendment. Heller and its progeny lead us to conclude that Brian Range remains among the people despite his 1995 false statement conviction. Having determined that Range is one of the people, we turn to the easy question, whether Section 922G1 regulates Second Amendment conduct. It does. Range's request to possess a rifle to hunt and a shotgun to defend himself at home tracks the constitutional right as defined by Heller. So the Second Amendment's plain text covers Range's conduct, and the Constitution presumptively protects that conduct. They then move to determine if the government has shown that there is historical evidence to support stripping Mr. Range of his right to keep and bear arms. The court states to answer that question, we must determine whether the government has justified applying Section 922G1 to Range by demonstrating that it is consistent with the nation's historical tradition of firearms regulation. We hold that the government has not carried its burden. In their decision, the En Banc panel finds that none of the historical evidence and support presented by the government is persuasive at all. They conclude that by saying that, for the reasons stated, we hold that the government has not shown that the nation's historical tradition of firearms regulation supports depriving Mr. Range of his Second Amendment right to possess a firearm. Then they, however, go on to talk about that their decision is limited in some regards to just Mr. Range and his situation, since this is an as-applied challenge. That's also very important. It's not a facial challenge to the statute at large, but instead as applied to him specifically. So this is a huge win. I cannot emphasize this enough. You have the Third Circuit En Banc panel finding that the use of this federal prohibition against Mr. Range is in fact unconstitutional. This ruling now opens the door for more challenges like this one, where someone who has maybe a nonviolent felony or some sort of misdemeanor can now seek their ability to purchase and possess firearms once again. It will also be interesting to see if the government decides to seek Supreme Court review of this decision. We recently saw the ATF in the Cargill bump stock lawsuit where they lost at the Fifth Circuit En Banc panel level. They had to go before the Supreme Court, and now they're seeking Supreme Court review. So it's going to be interesting to see if they do the same thing with this one. So this issue of nonviolent felon prohibitions could soon eventually make its way up to the Supreme Court. It's going to be interesting to see how the government plays this from here. But for now, we have a significant win. We have a very important win in a post-Bruin world where Bruin and the analysis, the text, history, and tradition analysis is now being applied. And it was found that Mr. Range can in fact still purchase and possess firearms, that he does not fall outside of the class of the people as defined in the text of the Second Amendment, and that the government here has no historical support to restrict his access to firearms. So again, a very significant win, and I will leave a link to the decision down below if you want to read it for yourself. But if you want to learn more about what's going on in the two-way world, you can also watch these videos here on the screen. But as always, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.